Welcome to the battlefield of brains, where strategy meets chaos and every move burns with intensity. Watch grandmasters clash, pieces fall, and legends rise. Wesley opens with the D-pawn thrust, staking central ground immediately, and signaling a long strategic battle ahead. Sanghoon ounces with his own D-pawn, mirroring the center and calmly accepting Wesley's invitation to fight. Wesley advances the C-pawn, challenging the pawn chain directly and demanding tension in the heart of the board. Sanghoon reinforces with the E-pawn, building a solid wall and preparing classical development behind it. Wesley develops the knight to C3, adding pressure to the center and sharpening the struggle over key dark squares. Sanghoon brings the knight to F6, eyeing central squares and preparing flexible counterplay. Wesley captures on D5 with the C-pawn, opening lines and forcing immediate structural decisions. Sanghoon recaptures with the E-pawn, accepting an isolated structure but freeing his dark squared bishop. Wesley pins with the bishop to G5, targeting the knight and hinting at future tactical ideas. Sanghoon supports the center with C6, solidifying the pawn chain and limiting Wesley's pressure. Wesley strengthens with E3, calmly preparing development and keeping the position controlled yet tense. Sanghoon pushes the H-pawn, questioning the bishop and gaining space on the kingside flank. Wesley retreats the bishop to H4, maintaining the pin and refusing to surrender pressure. Sanghoon develops the bishop to 5, activating it actively before locking the structure. Wesley centralizes the queen to F3, increasing pressure on D5 and lining up tactical motifs. Sanghoon calmly retreats the bishop to H7, preserving it and keeping options flexible. Wesley captures on F6 with the bishop, eliminating the knight and doubling Sanghoon's kingside pawns. Sanghoon recaptures with the queen, restoring material balance while centralizing his most powerful piece. Wesley trades queens on F6, steering the battle toward a sharp, structural middle game. Sanghoon recaptures with the G-pawn, creating doubled pawns but opening the G-file for future activity. Wesley boldly moves his king to D2, stepping toward the center in true endgame spirit. Sanghoon develops the knight to D7, regrouping and preparing to reroute toward active squares. Wesley brings the knight to F3, reinforcing central control and eyeing key dark squares. Sanghoon jumps the knight to B6, aiming at C4 and probing for dynamic counterplay. Wesley develops the bishop to D3, pointing directly at the kingside and preparing harmonious coordination. Sanghoon leaps to C4 with check, striking actively and forcing Wesley to respond immediately. Wesley captures that knight with his bishop, removing the intruder and calming the position. Sanghoon recaptures with the D-pawn, opening the center and gaining a passed pawn on C4. Wesley pushes the B-pawn to B3, challenging the advanced pawn and seeking structural clarity. Sanghoon captures on B3, grabbing material and creating fresh imbalances on the queen side. Wesley recaptures with the A-pawn, opening the A-file and preparing potential rook activity. Sanghoon advances the A-pawn, gaining space and fixing Wesley's queenside structure. Wesley centralizes the king to it too, improving coordination and stepping toward the evolving endgame. Sanghoon develops the bishop to b4, pinning and increasing pressure on Wesley's queenside. Wesley maneuvers the knight to a2, targeting c3 and preparing to challenge the bishop. Sanghoon retreats the bishop to d6, preserving it while maintaining influence over key diagonals. Wesley repositions the knight to d2, regrouping and reinforcing central squares. Sanghoon pushes the b-pawn aggressively, expanding space and preparing queenside play. Wesley swings the rook to cone, contesting the open file and eyeing potential infiltration. Sanghoon centralizes the king to d7, stepping confidently into the battle arena. Wesley reroutes the knight to c3, increasing pressure and coordinating with the rook. Sanghoon activates the rook to 8, seizing the open file and preparing for tactical skirmishes. Wesley advances the king to f3, centralizing boldly and coordinating rooks for long-term pressure. Sanghoon repositions the bishop to b4, keeping activity while eyeing central squares. Wesley reroutes the knight to e4, occupying a powerful outpost and targeting weak points. Sanghoon captures on d2 with his bishop, eliminating a defender and shaking coordination. Wesley recaptures with the knight, restoring material balance and keeping central control. Sanghoon lifts the rook to a6, preparing lateral defense and potential queenside counterplay. Wesley swings the rook to a3, signaling aggressive intentions along the third rank. Sanghoon doubles rooks with re8, reinforcing the a file and preparing exchanges. Wesley penetrates with rc5, planting a rook deep and provoking structural tension. Sanghoon advances the a-pawn, gaining space and challenging Wesley's queenside setup. Wesley pushes the b-pawn forward, locking structure and restraining pawn expansion. Sanghoon centralizes the king to 7, reinforcing defense under rising pressure. Wesley lifts the rook to h5, suddenly switching wings and threatening kingside targets. Sanghoon tucks the rook to height, guarding the back rank cautiously. Wesley calmly repositions the king to e2, improving coordination for the endgame grind. Sanghoon activates the bishop to g6, pointing at key diagonals and defensive squares. Wesley returns the rook to c5, maintaining dominance on the 5th rank. Sanghoon steps the king to b7, tightening defensive structure carefully. Wesley improves the king to dun, centralizing further and preparing deeper infiltration. Sanghoon pushes the h-pawn, seeking space and distraction on the flank. Wesley advances his own h-pawn, preventing expansion and stabilizing structure. Sanghoon places the rook on d8, contesting central files firmly. Wesley steps the king to cone, aligning rooks for coordinated pressure. Sanghoon slides the rook to d5, blocking lines and challenging activity. Wesley doubles rooks with rc3, stacking heavy pieces aggressively. Sanghoon shifts the rook to 5, targeting pawns and probing weaknesses. Wesley develops the knight to f3, reinforcing central and kingside control. Sanghoon retreats the rook to 8, regrouping, under mounting tension. Wesley repositions the rook to a2, maintaining flexibility across ranks. Sanghoon drops the bishop to h7, preserving it defensively. Wesley maneuvers the knight to a1, preparing a leap toward stronger squares. Sanghoon returns the rook to d5, guarding key files once more. Wesley advances the king to b2, boldly stepping toward queenside operations. Sanghoon activates the rook to gate, eyeing potential counterplay along the file. Wesley marches the king to f3, signaling confidence and coordination. Sanghoon pushes the rook to g4, applying pressure to pawns. Wesley reinforces with g3, blunting the rook's activity immediately. Sanghoon retreats the rook to gate, resetting defenses patiently. Wesley brings the knight to g2, tightening coordination and guarding vital squares. Sanghoon centralizes the bishop to e4, aiming at weaknesses and tactical ideas. Wesley plants the knight on f4, a powerful outpost increasing attacking chances. Sanghoon counters with rook to 5, maintaining activity and resisting collapse. Wesley slides the rook to a1, doubling rooks on the a file and tightening long-term pressure. Sanghoon calmly places the bishop on f3, guarding key squares and reinforcing kingside defense. Wesley brings the other rook to cone, connecting heavy pieces and preparing a central breakthrough. Sanghoon shifts the rook to 8, reinforcing the back rank and bracing for impact. Wesley storms into c5 with his rook, penetrating the 5th rank and attacking weaknesses. Sanghoon captures that rook on c5, trying to reduce pressure through exchanges. Wesley immediately recaptures on c5 with the remaining rook, keeping full control of the file. Sanghoon retreats the rook to height, clinging to defensive squares on the back rank. Wesley swings the rook to 5, slicing across the 5th rank and targeting fragile pawns. Sanghoon lifts the rook to h6, scrambling to guard his kingside structure. Wesley repositions the knight to d3, centralizing and preparing powerful jumps forward. Sanghoon activates the bishop to g4, seeking counterplay and pressuring key squares. Wesley returns the rook to c5, maintaining dominance over the critical 5th rank. Sanghoon retreats the bishop to e2, tightening defensive coordination under heavy strain. Wesley jumps the knight to f4, landing on a strong outpost and increasing pressure. Sanghoon repositions the bishop to f3, trying to hold the collapsing structure together. Wesley thrusts the pawn to d5, cracking open the center and igniting tactical fire. Sanghoon moves the king to 7, stepping towards safety but drifting into danger. Wesley captures on sheiks with check, rook tearing into the position with brutal precision. Sanghoon slides the king to d7, escaping check but losing coordination. Wesley invades with rook to b6, dominating the 6th rank and squeezing space. Sanghoon retreats the rook to height, forced back into passive defense. Wesley captures on d5, removing a pawn and widening structural wounds. Sanghoon brings the rook to seat, desperately seeking counterplay on open files. Wesley centralizes again with rook to c5, controlling key entry squares. Sanghoon shifts the rook to 8, guarding the back rank anxiously. Wesley lifts the rook to f5, doubling pressure across ranks and files. Sanghoon returns the rook to c8, repeating defense under relentless attack. Wesley checks with rook to a7, driving the king into further exposure. Sanghoon steps the king to d6, fleeing but walking deeper into the net. Wesley captures on f7, eliminating a pawn and shredding kingside protection. Sanghoon activates the rook to c2, hoping for desperate counter chances. Wesley captures on f6 with check, forcing the king further into open ground. Sanghoon moves the king to f5, wandering under constant assault. Wesley checks again with rook to e6, cutting escape routes with precision. Sanghoon retreats the king to 5, cornered and under suffocating pressure. Wesley calmly repositions the rook to 8, threatening decisive infiltration. Sanghoon drops the bishop to dun, attempting a final defensive shield. Wesley advances the pawn to d6, creating a dangerous passed pawn ready to queen. Sanghoon checks with rook to c3, a last desperate resource to complicate matters. Wesley steps the king to b2, calmly sidestepping the check and keeping control. Sanghoon slides the rook to koan, hoping for counterplay, but overlooking the tactic. Wesley captures on koan with his king, removing the final rook, and forcing Sanghoon to resign due to decisive material loss and a completely winning endgame. I'll end the video here. Please, give me a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll keep finding the best and newest videos to share with you. Thank you so much, and I wish you all happiness and good health.